So yes, so the companions, just as we hopefully would have done, took it extremely seriously, would write down, if they were able to write, they would write down the ayat, they would repeat them, they would take their written ayat with them. They were not left with the Prophet ﷺ. They would, whatever they wrote, it was theirs. They took it home with them, taught it to their wives, their children, their neighbors, their friends, their colleagues. They would spread it. So, and whoever could write from them would make their own copies from the copy that the scribe had. So now we had original copies, original ayat written in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Sahaba would have copies of those. Okay, so now we have the companions learning from each other and also from the Prophet ﷺ, and the companions writing the ayat in front of the Prophet ﷺ and leaving with their written ayat, and then other companions making copies from the written. Okay, so now we have two links, a link directly to the Prophet ﷺ, oral and written, and the other companions, a male and female, making copies of the written and learning from the Sahaba. So now we're two chains from the Prophet ﷺ. And it could be more. It could be a companion who learns from a companion who learns from a companion who read in front of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. And this is all happening during the prime time of the Prophet ﷺ. So now it's time to talk about how reliable is the memory of the companions. The answer in brief is extremely. Just as an anecdote, Arabs, the majority of them didn't used to read and write. And even if they did, it wasn't their thing. Their talent was in memory. That's what they were known for. That's what they were good at. That's what they competed in. That's how they told stories. That's how they transmitted information, through poetry and memorizing poetry. It was well known that most Arabs could memorize an entire poem from hearing it once. And if it had to be repeated a second time, then you may be disabled. You may have some learning disability in Arab terms, okay? If they came among us today, they would like say, oh, I don't know what they would say about our generation who cannot memorize anything almost from hearing it once. So believe it or not, this is the truth. The Arabs used to have amazing memories. So if they used to memorize entire poems from listening to it once, and if it had to be repeated, it was frowned upon, of course they could memorize the Quran from hearing it once. And add to that, repeating it and caring about it and write it down, yes, it was flawless memory, to extent of human capacity, of course. So they had, Arabs had amazing memory in general. In addition to that, the companions cared very much about memorizing. They used to compete. The Prophet ﷺ used to encourage the companions to memorize. I'm sure you can think of any hadith now that gives you so much reward if you memorize the Quran and if you recite the Quran. So imagine you're a companion hearing the Prophet ﷺ saying, whoever memorizes, you know, the first 10 ayat of Surah Al-Kahf gets so-and-so, gets protected from Ad-Dajjal. Whoever memorizes Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran gets so-and-so reward in the hereafter and comes with covered with clouds of angels or birds. There are all kinds of encouragements to memorize. So that's what the companions really cared about. Of course, they did their daily lives. They had to work. They had to sell, buy, travel, do their jobs, you know, take care of their palm trees and their animals, but they would also be memorizing the Quran and caring about that. Let me see, there's some chat. They used to have ruwa. Yes, they would hire someone to accompany a poet and memorize his poetry. Very good, yes. That's basically the storytelling or the conveyors of information. Jazakumullahu khairan. And the companions competed with each other. And the way they used to compete and compare is not by who's stronger and who's smarter and who's taller. It was by who knew more Quran. And there's no more clear indication of this competition other than when the Prophet ﷺ says, your imam should be aqra'ukum, the one who um, let's say, knows the most Quran. That's the best interpretation, because it's not necessarily being able to articulate the letters, but it's more like knowing what the letters also mean and applying it. But that's how they used to compete. When it's time for prayer, who would be the imam? The winner, the one with the most Quran in their heart. Who would be the leader in an army in the Battle of Badr? The Prophet ﷺ, what did he used to ask? When the grave would have 2 companions per grave, because it was just the numbers, not the Badr, Uhud, after the Battle of Uhud, when the graves were joined between multiple Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ used to put in front, he would ask, what would he ask? Which one of the 2 brothers memorized more Quran? So he would qaddim, he would put in front the one who had more Quran in their heart. So this was something in the forefront of their ihtimam, of their concern and what they care about. And guess what? Certain women would ask for their husbands to memorize and teach them certain ayat as their mahr, their dowry. Instead of, how many millions do you have, or how many cars do you have, or how many books do you have? The books are for wadi'a. The women would ask, how many surahs do you have? And I will marry you on condition you teach me those surahs. Look at that. That's how, yes, that we're talking about a generation of Quran. A lot of scholars call it al-jil al-Qur'ani, the generation of Quran, where it's not just memorizing, it's so much more than that. It's part of their lifestyle. It's the way of thinking. How many books? Yeah, Brother Wadia, yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you want to marry a woman who asks you how many books you have? Or a woman who asks you how much Quran have you memorized? That's a question for yourself. But yeah, hundreds of the Sahaba had started memorizing the Quran. Some of them memorized it as they were revealed. So by the time the Prophet ﷺ moved on to Rafiq al-A'la to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a number of Sahaba, that's not little, had memorized the Quran entirely from the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them had memorized the Quran entirely, but not all of it from the Prophet ﷺ, but through a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, a relative. And scores, hundreds had memorized a lot of the Quran, but maybe not all of it. So the Quran was being preserved now in reciting, and we mentioned also the scribes. I think now we talk about the scribes. Yes. Okay. So any question before we're going to kind of really now concentrate for the next few slides about the scribing of the Quran. Okay, Brother Wadia, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Wallahi, I had a question 3 seconds ago and I forgot it.
Probably about books and dowries.
There's a question in the group chat until I remember my question.
Okay, good. When you say they memorized the Quran entirely, what do you mean exactly? So they've memorized what was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ by them. So let's say Zayd bin Thabit and Abdullah bin Mas'ud, they were the top memorizers of the Quran. They would memorize, and Ubay bin Ka'b, these 3. The 3 of them would memorize the Quran as they were revealed, because they were also scribes and they were young, and they would spend most of their time with the Prophet ﷺ. That's where they hang out. That was their thing. So especially Zayd radiallahu anhu and Ubay, they would be there when the Quran was revealed most of the time, and they would be writing it. And if not, if they heard there was a new revelation, they'd drop everything and go to the Prophet ﷺ and memorize it from him. So by the time the Prophet ﷺ passed away and moved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these and a number more had memorized the whole Quran from A to Z, from Al-Fatiha to An-Nas. That's what's meant by the entire Quran. Yes. Just to make it clear, is it haram to say you forgot an ayah? No, it's not haram. It's frowned upon to use the language of I forgot. It's better to say unsituha, however a good translation you can come up with. The best I can come up is I was made to forget by the shaitan or by my sin. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah. as the two brothers said. The Jazakallah khair. MashaAllah. Everyone is helping. Thank you so much for helping. Okay. Wadia, did you remember your question?
I remember the question after I have been made to forget it. Yes. So the slide before it says that the Arab had great memory, right? So in some of the ahadith it says that some of the Sahaba would take them 10 years to memorize, like, Surah Al-Baqarah. Is
Correct.
that because they took a long time also contemplating and understanding the tafsir?
Yes, and actually it was a method up until even the time of Ibn al-Jazari, which is 800 Hijri. Teachers would not teach their students more than 5 ayahs a day. Because they were not concentrating on memorizing only. They were mostly concentrating on understanding and applying. And they would consider it very frowned upon if a teacher would teach a student more than 5 ayahs a day. It means you're hurrying in the students, you're making them a qari where they're verbally able to pronounce the Quran, but in their manners and in their deen, they're lacking. So they would make sure that the growth internally in their manners and understanding and Islam and all of that is hand in hand with their memorizing of the words of the Quran. So that's why, I think there's a story, I'm not sure of how authentic it is, that Umar radiallahu anhu took him 8 years to memorize Al-Baqarah. It's not the memory part. It's that they would prevent themselves from going beyond 5 ayahs, maximum 10 ayahs a day, because they cared so much. They didn't want to add an ayah if they haven't applied the ayah that they learned yesterday. So they would have like a stop on their speed, so that they actually face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that they're actually applying what they're receiving in their manners and daily life.
Would you advise us, Shaikha Khadeejah, to have a short tafsir with us and read while memorizing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a short tafsir, something that doesn't distract you too much. Yes, definitely.
Jazakumullah.
Because having a tafsir or an English translation or whatever language you're comfortable with translation, that's why the Quran was revealed, right? Not so that we just repeat the words. Repeating the words is important, that gives you ajr, but it's not why the Quran was revealed, right? It's revealed for it to be a message, a guidance for our lives. So if we don't understand what we're reading, we're missing the point.
Right. طيب, جزاكم khairan.
Jazakallah khair. So let's see, Sister Yasmin has a question, and I know Brother Ali raised his hand, and Zanifa also. Let me take Yasmin's question, if you don't mind, and then Brother Ali. How would one apply verses that aren't commands? Like Surah Yusuf, how would you apply those ayah? Sometimes applying them doesn't happen immediately, right? So maybe something like Surah Yusuf wouldn't take a lot of time to memorize if you're looking for application, because not all the ayat are directly commands, right? But there's a general, the theme of chastity, of humbleness, of brotherly love. Actually, there are so many lessons that can be learned from Surah Yusuf, now that I think of it. It's all about manners and human relationship and siblings and jealousy and how to deal with men and women in one household that aren't related. It's actually really full of lessons. I know it's a story, but a story has so many lessons. Like I can think of the first ayat, the first like 10 ayahs of Surah Yusuf, that is all about sibling rivalry and jealousy. So someone needs to contemplate and make sure that are their hearts pure towards their siblings, or do they have jealousy against them? How do they feel about their brothers and sisters? Will they put them ahead of themselves? Oh, so many topics. There's a course in Arabic. I apologize for that. We are constantly hunting for instructors to give courses in English. There's a course in Arabic every Friday afternoon from 2:30 to 4. That's just about Surah Yusuf. And I think it started 2 weeks ago, I think. So there's still most of the course left. If you're interested, I encourage, inshallah, for you to look into that. Of course, the timing is Eastern Standard Time. Abdullah bin Abbas said that people that recite without understanding are just throwing out dates. Yes, Jazakumullah khairan. Second, Sister Yasmin's question, reflection, lessons, yes. Yes, Surah Yusuf is full of reflections. I must have clicked on something I didn't mean to. Let's see.